The most common misconception about Bad Bunny sounds roughly like this. Oh, he's just some Latin American industry plant with autotune who makes trash club music, has a weird style, paints his nails, and got popular hanging out with the Kardashians. I mean, sounds very simple, right? And I think most of us are pretty unlikely to want to dig into the deep layers of Spanish-speaking world, study the history of Puerto Rico, or try to understand what Bad Bunny is actually mumbling all the time, and why he refused to tour the US, or why his Super Bowl performance somehow sparked arguments all the way up at the political level in the US. For most of us, this curly-haired muchacho sounds like he just got home from the dentist appointment. You know what I mean? So today, I'd like to finally answer the burning question. Why him? What made humanity press play on his songs 120 billion times? How did he pick up 6 Grammys, and what actually is this thing he's been passionately championing and fighting for year after year? Is he really the genius everyone says he is? Or do we just not understand him? You're on the I'm All Ears channel, and I've been listening to one album a day for the last 11 years now, and today we're talking about Bad Bunny. But diving deep in his music, let's rewind to the 70s, when salsa was one of the main genres of Caribbean music, of Puerto Rico, and of the Latin American diaspora in New York. And right away, let's look at this incredibly charismatic singer performing in front of an enormous American audience. This is Héctor Lavoe, one of the greatest voices in salsa, often called the singer of the singers. Héctor was the voice of the Puerto Rican diaspora in the era of the Fania and salsa. Watch how he sings, dances, and snorts a couple of vitamins to get his energy up before a show. And now look at this Bad Bunny performance. Rings a bell? Or take, say, this song by El Gran Combo de Puerto Rico. And now a song from Bad Bunny's latest album. That's exactly what I'm getting at. Puerto Rico and all of Latin America had already been exporting music, dance, culture, and identity to the US for decades. A lot of talented Latin American singers and artists were born in poverty, but as young people, they left their homeland and moved to America. New York, the Bronx. They were looking for success, luck, a better life. They built diasporas, and then they made music for their own people, out on foreign soil. And that's exactly the environment salsa was born in the 60s and the 70s. Its beginnings were laid back in Cuba, when jazz and Afro-Cuban rhythms got fused together. But its real explosion, salsa lived through in New York, where in the 60s the most important label of Latin American music was founded, Fania Records. If you know Motown, well, Fania is something similar, but for Latin American music. So salsa was the music of migration, the music of diaspora. Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Caribbean, and New York all came together in one place, and history was made. For those emigrants, salsa was the voice of the homeland, a chance to feel the nostalgia for their old life, for the bittersweet memories of a poor but happy existence. But the most important element of today's story is Puerto Rico itself. It may be a small island, but oh, how much talent was born there. It was home to a whole range of artists who became the prototypes for this or that musical genre. It's their trombonist, Willie Colon, it's El Gran Combo de Puerto Rico, and also a lot of other Puerto Rican immigrants, like Tito Puente or Frankie Ruiz. And so, this era of salsa and Caribbean music runs on until the 80s. And in the 90s, while rap music was living through the golden era of hip-hop in the US, on the stages of Latin America, its own equivalent is being born. This genre grows out of a mix of Jamaican dancehall, Panamanian, reggae, hip-hop, and Puerto Rican underground. I know you're going to say right now, hold on, this is the trashiest music on the planet, all with the same exact rhythm. But if you'll allow me, over the course of this video, I'll explain to you why you might be wrong. Early reggaeton was the music of youth, of the streets, of protest, and the sexual liberation. It was long considered dirty and vulgar, but before long, this genre would flood the world after the first steps of pioneers like Daddy Yankee, Vico C, DJ Playero, DJ Nelson, and a bit later, Don Omar, Tego Calderon. And so all these artists, the salseros of the 70s and the 80s and the reggaetoneros of the 90s, These are the bricks that Bad Bunny's music is made of, the music that hundreds of millions of people listen to today. Bad Bunny heard all this music, studied it, and said, I'm gonna make a synthesis of these genres. Add a little bit of Puerto Rican slang, a bit of marketing, and my own special sauce.
It's not gravy, it's sauce.
And that's how the fascinating story of Bad Bunny begins. Benito, which by the way is the artist's real name, is born in 1994 to a simple family, a school teacher mother, and a truck driver father, and he grows up in the town of Vega Baja in Puerto Rico. Let me show you this place on Google Maps. Vega Baja is a little town right by the beach. So Bad Bunny's childhood was spent on warm beaches with white sand. As a kid, at home in Benito's house, Latin American music was always playing. Marc Anthony, Victor Manuelle, Vico C. Later, he'd get into Daddy Yankee and Héctor Lavoe. His stage name came about by accident. In school, for Easter, they made him dress up in a bunny costume, which he really didn't like. Somebody photographed him with a very unhappy face, and that's where the nickname came from. Bad Bunny. Anyway, the kid started making music pretty early, at 13, because as a child he sang in the church choir. While he was studying at the University of Puerto Rico, he found a part-time job at a supermarket, but he had a side hustle. He was uploading his tracks to SoundCloud, hoping to become a star one day. Until in 2016, his track Diles took off. From there, within a few years, he's doing collabs with Karol G, J Balvin, Cardi B, Drake, and very quickly, from a supermarket worker, he turned into a professional musician. And that's how it all started. Okay. But what is he actually doing musically? When we think of a person who's won a bunch of Grammys, we picture some kind of a vocal master or a super skilled rapper. But with Bad Bunny, a lot of people get it wrong. His strength isn't that he's the most technically gifted vocalist. No, his power is precisely in the synthesis of cultural and musical elements and in bringing them together in his own work. Benito understood how to masterfully blend reggaeton, Latin trap, Caribbean music, salsa, pop rock, and create a dope product out of these elements. But honestly, to understand the sound of Bad Bunny, talking just about the genres of his music is not going to be sufficient. We must talk about one very important feature of Latin American culture, completely unknown to us Europeans. But I will still start with the genres first and then get to this unique feature. So when people talk about Bad Bunny, they usually mention Latin trap, reggaeton, urbano, and dembow. But what do these complicated words even mean? Let's start with urbano, or música urbana. That's the broadest term. It's basically an umbrella term for modern Latin American street pop music, which all the above-mentioned genres fall under. Reggaeton is already a concrete genre with a very recognizable rhythm, but in the opinion of many, also super repetitive. Reggaeton is usually more club-oriented, aimed at dancing, romantic, and sexual. So, roughly speaking, everything you've heard in Spanish is most likely reggaeton. I remember once thinking I'd never in my life listen to that kind of music. And now here I am making a whole video essay about it. Anyway, this rhythm of reggaeton, its foundation, it's called dembow. But dembow is also a genre in its own right, which spread in the Dominican Republic. It's much faster, more street, and sounds more like rapping than singing. Give it a listen. It sounds really cool and unusual. And the last genre, Latin trap, here it's all pretty simple. You take the music of Travis Scott and translate it into Spanish. Hi-hats, rapping and singing, and those typical trap beats. Early Bad Bunny mostly hung around this genre. If you look at his discography, then the first album, Por Siempre, is a mix of Latin trap and reggaeton, with only a few small dashes of something new, like alternative rock, for example. On the album Yo Hago Lo Que Me Da La Gana, we get a direct return by Benito to old classic reggaeton, stuff similar to Daddy Yankee, who even does a guest verse there. Bad Bunny listened to a lot of reggaeton growing up, and he wanted to pay his dues to those times. Here, you can clearly feel the sharp switch of the beats mid-song, for example on the track Zafaera, where the melody and the tempo of the rhythm change many times over.
¿Qué tú te crees?
The next release, El Último Tour del Mundo, adds one important thing that would change the artist's sound forever. Here, alongside reggaeton, you get alternative rock and slow guitars, which make Bad Bunny sound so melancholic, sad, and a bit psychedelic, but at the same time so inspiring, like when you're coming home at 6 in the morning after the best party of your life.
Queda algo pero casi nada. Y el amor no se trata de intentar.
And that psychedelia is clearly heard on the next album, Un Verano Sin Ti. Here, for the first time in his career, Bad Bunny mixed such a huge number of different rhythms, genres, and dances that it sounds like a colorful festival of music.
Dime, ¿vamos para el mambo o no vamos para el mambo? Tú me dices, mami. Zumba. Hoy sí que sí.
There is mambo and merengue and bachata, classic Latin dance styles, but there's also a lot of pensive sad songs that just impress you. And now I'd like to say a couple of words about Debí Tirar Más Fotos, the artist's latest album. Here, Bad Bunny's sound is combined with Puerto Rican traditions. There's a lot of salsa and plena influence. I've already talked about salsa a little bit, and plena is the music of working class Afro Puerto Rican neighborhoods, where people sang about what was happening around them over the drum rhythms. News, gossip, life on the block, and so on. On DTMF, you can hear the synthesis of old and new. It's a mix of salsa and electronica, plena and club sound. This album is to me the overall peak of the singer's career, where lyrically and musically he pays his dues to his homeland. Starting my conversation about Bad Bunny's sound, I mentioned one important characteristic of Latin America that's present on all the artists' albums, and I'm of course talking about dance. Dance for Latin Americans is not the same as dance for us, Europeans. It's a part of their culture, their genetics. Look, for a lot of us, dance is either something ceremonial, like a wedding or like a graduation, like going to a club, or something a lot of people are shy about and only do once the lights are off. Well, maybe not shy, but still, it's something that you don't do on a daily basis. But in Latin America, dance is not a skill, it's a way of existing. From childhood, they all watch how their parents dance, how their uncles and grandmothers dance. Their salsa, mambo, bachata aren't just dances. They're a part of how people live, celebrate, grieve, and even protest. And that's really important for understanding Bad Bunny's music. He does this not because dance music is popular and easier to sell, but because it's the tradition of his homeland. We listen to this music differently. We turn it on, we analyze the lyrics, we look for meaning, but in translation, we lose the dance. That cultural meaning we'll probably never understand. And by the way, the key word here is understanding. Most of us don't understand the language Bad Bunny sings in, and we listen to him anyway. We dance anyway. We understand it on some subconscious level anyway. And here, there's one important thing I want to mention. In order for Latin American artists to become a world star, they were almost always required to do one and the same thing: sing in English. That's what Shakira did, that's what Ricky Martin did, that's what almost everyone did who wanted to break into the world market. The logic is simple. You want the whole world to listen to you? Speak an international language. But Bad Bunny refused to do it. He didn't submit, he didn't start translating himself for anyone. He just kept singing in Spanish, and the world had to come to understand him, not the other way around. I'd even go further and say not had to, the world wanted to accept him and the Spanish language. It seems to me, and maybe to you too, that music in English has become some kind of a law or a rule, and that's getting a bit exhausting. Bad Bunny managed to monetize cultural diversity, and that's what sets him apart from a lot of other Spanish-speaking artists. Yet, how does that even happen? If you think about it, a lot of non-native English speakers from Europe did the exact same thing for years with English. I remember myself as a kid. I sang along to Eminem, 50 Cent, Linkin Park, with a set of sounds no native English speaker would ever have recognized.
Sono italiano, italiano vero.
So understanding the songs back then worked on an emotional level. We didn't understand the lyrics, but we loved the music. And Bad Bunny is the same, only now the leading role goes to Spanish. But Bad Bunny doesn't just sing in Spanish. He sings in very Puerto Rican Spanish. And that, let me tell you, is a whole thing on its own. The Puerto Rican accent means very often swallowed letters, local slang, and pronunciation that even native Spanish speakers sometimes go, wait, what did he just say? And Bad Bunny has this style of singing like he just came back from the dentist and got a shot of anesthesia. In Puerto Rican pronunciation, there's this quirk where they often don't pronounce the letter R. They swap it for an L. That's exactly why on the last album there is a song called Nueva York, that is Nueva York, New York. Or they say Puerto Rico instead of Puerto Rico. It's roughly like a heavy regional drawl that softens and swaps its consonants around. That's about how Bad Bunny's Spanish sounds. Except he does it constantly in every single line. Just watch any of his interviews or his live show. It's such a sweet trademark that millions of memes and jokes have already been made about. Benito also constantly uses slang you won't understand right away. Among the most common ones are, for example, bebesota, like Betty.
Bebesota.
Or duro, dura. These words have a ton of meanings. Duro is like, damn, that's hard. And dura, again, depending on the context. If we're talking about music, it's like, this music is straight fire. And if it's about a girl, it's, she's a baddie. And you could go on with this list forever, with words and phrases like ay bendito, perreo, pana. So in this video, Bad Bunny will even explain a bit of Puerto Rican slang. And better yet, just listen to a few of his albums or check out my playlist of Bad Bunny's best songs, which I put together specially for you. It's right here under the video. So Conejo Malo is like saying to the whole world, hey, just be yourself and don't change who you are, and you will be loved by many. Here, there was a really interesting situation worth telling you about. In the fall of 2025, Bad Bunny was announced as the headliner of the Super Bowl, which is probably the biggest stage in all of American pop culture, the one over 100 million people watch live. And instead of support, part of the conservative America basically detonated. How is this possible? A dude who doesn't sing in English is going to sing on the main American stage? Is he even American? And why in Spanish? Plus, on top of all that, a million scandals about Trump and ICE, and in that context, some people even went as far as calling for Benito to be deported. Even though Puerto Rico is US territory, Bad Bunny is a US citizen, and deporting him is effectively impossible. And so, at the very peak of that mess, he walks out onto the stage of Saturday Night Live, and speaks in Spanish. Warm words about Latin Americans, about how this is an important moment for the whole Latino community, and then he switches to English with a grin and adds, if you didn't understand what I just said, you've got 4 months until the Super Bowl to learn Spanish.
And if you didn't understand what I just said, you have 4 months to learn.
And it's so symbolic. It's a paradigm shift. Before, pop artists thought that they had to sing in English to accommodate the US, and here, for the first time, the US hears, well, now you have to learn Spanish. And it didn't come off as some arrogance. It came off as something totally fair. So, what does Bad Bunny actually sing about? When I first heard the lyrics of his songs, I thought right away, oh damn, he's one of those basic SoundCloud rappers or whatever. And well, honestly, some of his tracks are actually like this. A mix of sexually charged lyrics, constant flexing and dramatism. On the song Nadie Sabe, he starts telling you what a heavy burden fame is for people, and at the end, he whispers in a super dramatic voice.
Yo sé que no soy perfecto y tampoco quiero serlo. Me gusta ser como soy. A veces bueno, a veces malo.
And it honestly sounds a bit corny when somebody says, I'm not perfect, and I don't want to be perfect. I'm the way I am. Well, that was my first impression of him. But then, later, I heard much deeper songs like Apagón, and I understood that he's got a lot of deep lyrics that genuinely make you think. So, let's start from the beginning. The first album, Por Siempre, is mostly about love. Here, Bad Bunny still is playing a role of a young kid who just crawled his way up from the bottom, trying to make money and get famous. And of course, about girls. But even here, the first seeds of something bigger are already peeking through. Solo de Mi is a story about toxic relationships that at the first glance look like a real love, but actually aren't at all. Next, Yo hago lo que me da la gana, which decodes as I do whatever I want, it's a confession of love to old school reggaeton. But there's also, aside from the lyrics about parties, the song Yo perreo sola, a song about a girl who stays on a dance floor by herself because she just wants to dance alone, not because she's waiting for male attention. This track symbolizes the feminist streak in Bad Bunny's music. It's a really interesting situation though, because at the start of his career, Bad Bunny was criticized for dropping some misogynistic lyrics in his songs, acting like this true player, but at the same time, on his second album, he's already showing listeners the opposite. The next album, El Último Tour del Mundo, is already darker and more introspective. Here, it's more about the fame, love that's no longer as carefree as it used to be. Next up, we've got Un Verano Sin Ti, my favorite album in his catalog. The self-titled song Un Verano Sin Ti, from Spanish, A Summer Without You, is a fantastic track. I feel like nothing could hurt more like a whole summer without a person you love. Overall, this release feels like some beach in Puerto Rico. I've never been there, but it still feels like it. A very summery album that conveys all the pros and cons of summer. Among the cons is that it's obviously about to end. Through the album runs the feeling of constant melancholy that everything's going to end at some point. Both the summer and the love that seemed eternal. On the surface, beaches and parties, and inside, constant melancholy, nostalgia and sadness. It comes through really well on the track Titi Me Preguntó. In translation, my auntie asked me. Benito's auntie asks him how many girls Bad Bunny even has, and he answers, a lot, and all from different countries. But when the song reaches its end, Bad Bunny realizes that this isn't actually worth flexing. But a sad thing, because none of these girls stay with him for long. There's also the track El Apagón, literally the turning point of that whole album. Because for the first time, Bad Bunny touches on political themes, and it's a very Latin American reality, because in that part of the planet, blackouts happen a lot. Through earthquakes or hurricanes, through poverty, through a poorly run electrical grid that also got privatized. And it's right here that Bad Bunny opens up the big theme of gentrification. He criticizes the authorities for spending years letting rich Americans move onto the island, buy up property and enjoy tax breaks, while the locals were left with nothing. For example, this happened during Hurricane Maria in 2017, one of the most terrifying catastrophes in the history of Puerto Rico, which took close to 3,000 lives. Bad Bunny reacted right away back then. He recorded and posted an emotional freestyle, Maria, on Instagram, in which he poured out all the pain and rage of his people. And already on the track Apagón itself, he says that suddenly everybody wants to become a Latino and repeats that Puerto Rico is his land and he won't give it up to anyone. The second to last album, Nadie sabe lo que va a pasar mañana, is about the burden of fame. It's about how you get criticized, how they write about you, how hard it is to stay yourself when you're the biggest star on the planet, and about loneliness. But the true finale of Bad Bunny's lyrical evolution is his latest album, Debí tirar más fotos. It translates as I should have taken more photos, and it's the most personal and to me the most important album of his whole career. Here, Bad Bunny sings about his home country. It's an album about memory, about loss, and about home that just vanishes in the blink of an eye, and about how we usually notice the most precious things only when they're almost gone. And the best expression of that idea isn't even a song, it's the cover art. Just two simple white plastic chairs standing under a tree. You know, those cheap stackable plastic chairs you'll find literally in every country of the world. For us, they're just the ordinary chairs in the backyard. But for Latin Americans and migrants all over the world, it's a symbol of home. It's the chair grandma sits on in the yard, the one people sit on when they play cards, the one the whole family sits on a warm evening. And Bad Bunny puts two empty chairs on his album cover, because it's a story about the people who used to sit on them and who aren't there anymore. Some died, some moved away. And when you understand the symbolism of this album, it takes on a completely different value. Musically, it's an album where reggaeton meets traditional Puerto Rican music. But the main thing here is the lyrics. And the most interesting of them, Bad Bunny packs into 3 key tracks. The first is Nueva York. The song opens with a sample of the legendary salsa song Un Verano en Nueva York, a track about summer in New York that every Puerto Rican recognizes from the first note. It's dedicated to the diaspora, to those millions of Puerto Ricans who went to build the life in New York, Chicago, and Florida, but never stopped being Puerto Rican. But behind the pride in the new life they build lies pain. Because while they live across the ocean, in comfort, Puerto Rico itself is gradually being sold off to outside investors. The second, Lo que le pasó a Hawaii, which means what happened to Hawaii. To understand the power of this song, we have to talk about the history of the islands. In 1893, a group of American businessmen, backed by the US Marines, invaded Hawaii, and a few years later, the islands were annexed. The native Hawaiians were gradually squeezed out of their own land. For decades, their native language was effectively banned in schools. Sacred sites were built over with hotels, and the living culture was turned into a colorful souvenir for tourists. And Bad Bunny is appealing to exactly that pain. Watch out that the same thing doesn't happen to Puerto Rico.
No, no sueltes la bandera, ni olvides la lolay, que no quiero que hagan con.
And the third, the self-titled Debí tirar más fotos, the heart of the whole album. Lyrically, it's the simplest and at the same time the strongest thing on the record. Because at its core is one simple thought. You should have taken more photos. You should have taken more pictures of your grandma. You should have photographed that yard, that evening, those people, while they were still here. It's a song about how we usually don't capture our most precious moments because it feels like they'll last forever. And it's precisely because of that simplicity that this album exploded across the whole world. People started posting old photos and videos of their dead relatives with this track, and the song itself climbed to #1 on the world charts. Because the pain behind it is absolutely universal. You might not know a single word of Spanish and not know where Puerto Rico is, but you know exactly that feeling when taking a photo is already too late.
Debí darte más besos y abrazo las veces que pude.
And now, here's what makes this album unique. Bad Bunny released a 13-minute short film to it. It shows an old man from Puerto Rico who, with his friend, a frog, walks through his neighborhood and doesn't recognize it. And instead of traditional music, some awful electronic rock is blasting from the windows. He stops by his favorite bakery, and it's turned into a trendy, hipster coffee shop where the baristas don't even speak Spanish. He orders an ordinary quesito, a traditional pastry, and they ask him what kind of cheese, what size, what syrup, and he's never heard of these words in his whole life. He just wants a normal fucking quesito. In other words, absolutely everything looks foreign, cold, unfamiliar, even though he's at home. Then he wants to pay with cash and they only take cards, and in that moment a stranger walks up to him. The first person who speaks Spanish pays for his order and says, "We are still here." And at the end, his frog friend asks the old man to show him some photos of himself in his youth. And the old man answers, "I told you, I don't have many left. I should have taken more photos." And that's the whole meaning of the album. It's an album that's simultaneously a personal drama and a lesson in the history of Puerto Rican and Latin America. And that's exactly why DTMF is his best work. Tracing his whole path from Por Siempre to DTMF, we see how love songs gradually turn into songs about his homeland. The personal becomes political. And it's right here that the most interesting part of Bad Bunny's story begins. His political influence through music. We already talked about how the island of Puerto Rico passed under US control after 1898. Puerto Ricans are US citizens. They serve in the American Army, they live by the US laws, but at the same time they don't vote in presidential elections. In other words, that part of the country is only equal insofar as it's convenient. And when you add to that the blackouts, mass emigration, gentrification, you understand this is a whole history of colonial trauma. And in his political influence, Bad Bunny isn't limited to songs. In the summer of 2019, a gigantic scandal erupted in Puerto Rico. A private chat of the then governor of the island, Ricardo Rosselló, was leaked. In that chat, he and his advisors mocked women, journalists, minorities, and joked about people who died in Hurricane Maria, while the country was still mourning a lot of deaths. The people of Puerto Rico didn't like it. Hundreds of thousands took to the streets to protest, the biggest protest in the history of the island. The slogan was simple: Ricky, resign. And at the very peak of those protests, Bad Bunny interrupted his world tour, came home, and went out to protest together with his people. With Residente and Ile from Calle 13, who I already talked about in my ranking of the best Spanish language rap albums, right here, he releases the protest track Afilando los Cuchillos, which directly demands the governor's resignation and became an anthem of the whole movement. And the governor does in fact resign. All of that, together with the Saturday Night Live message, together with the incident before the Super Bowl, together with the years of Puerto Rican history uploaded as a visualizer on YouTube on every DTMF track instead of an album art, shows that Bad Bunny isn't just a successful musician. He's genuinely a person who, through his music, directly influenced the political system in his country and even provoked a huge reaction in the US. Benito knows that having reached this level of popularity, he has to use it for the good of his people, to do something for his homeland. And that genuinely impresses. But there's one important thing not to forget. We've already talked about his music, about the lyrics on his albums, about his political influence, but a lot of people fall in love not with Bad Bunny's new album, and not with his stories about Puerto Rico. No, we fall in love with the personality, with a human being. And here, it's very important to understand that the dude won over half of the planet, even though people don't even understand his language. And you know what? To me, the answer is that Bad Bunny became the biggest star on the planet, but at the same time, never started playing by someone else's rules. He stayed that same dude from Vega Baja, who sings in his Puerto Rican Spanish and drags a whole island onto the world stage behind him. And people love it. Because we're just tired of identical, run-of-the-mill artists who tune themselves to fit an identical format. And this dude just stays himself and shows the world something new. Bad Bunny effectively became an ambassador of Latin American culture to the whole world. Through him, millions of people who'd never heard of that part of the world suddenly found out what plena is, what a casito is, what a sapo concho is, why that white plastic chair is a symbol of home. He doesn't simplify his culture in order to sell it. He does the opposite, makes the whole world get curious, Google it, dig into it. And that to me is just fantastic. Plus, Benito speaks out loud about everyone. Not just Puerto Ricans, but about women's rights too, speaking out against the culture of machismo. That's a term from Spanish that describes a culture where the man is deciding about everything and the woman is like his property, who's supposed to be obedient and do everything he tells her. And at the very end, about the LGBT community. These are themes he also pushes onto the agenda, and in doing so, he makes his fan base so diverse. He just promotes a normal, basic openness toward all people, no matter who you are. And in my opinion, that's the only normal way of life for a person of the 21st century. And this openness is best seen not even in his words, but in how he looks and dresses. Bad Bunny's fashion is a continuation of that same fight against machismo culture I already talked about, but you have to understand the context. Reggaeton is historically a very macho genre, a ton of songs with a sexual subtext or about dominance, where the woman is just decoration next to the cool dude. And here, suddenly, in this very manly world, the biggest star of the genre is born. And he walks out on the stage with painted nails, in a skirt, with pearl necklace, and weird glasses, like he's provoking everybody. And you can see this best in the video for Yo Perreo Sola, where Bad Bunny dresses as a woman for part of the video. And maybe for some of us it looks wild, but that's exactly who he is, the real Bad Bunny. So if someone's asking you why Bad Bunny is the hottest musician of the present day, the worst answer is to say, because he makes trendy music. Bad Bunny became huge because at the right historical moment, he took traditional Latin American music, a politically charged Puerto Rican identity, and the language he refused to translate for convenience, and built a career out of it. But his most important achievement isn't just his success. It's that he made the whole world, at least for a while, speak Spanish, talk about Puerto Rico, about colonial history, about the fate of people who usually don't have a voice. And this very local thing became painfully understandable to the whole world. In that sense, Bad Bunny isn't just the biggest artist in the world. He's proof that the global culture of the future doesn't necessarily have to be English, just to be accessible and understandable for everybody. So yeah, and me? I'm probably just gonna go and take a few photos, so I don't regret it later.
Lasciatomi cantare, perché ne sono fiero, sono italiano, italiano vero.